Chosen trigger. My boss said I was replaceable. Now I own his office. 1. Setup. I was a hopeful, hard-working man with a quiet wallet of dreams. The kind who measured life in hours saved for tomorrow and the feel of a trusted partner's hand on my shoulder. And I carry friendships like sturdy tools in a well-used belt. I believed in steady effort and fair talk, in late nights spent listening to a mentor who spoke in simple truths, in the kind of loyalty that makes a teen feel like family. I build my days around others, especially the people I trusted most. A business partner who wore optimism like a badge, a wife who believed in the best version of me, a brother who kept our plans grounded, and a mentor who showed me how to turn small wins into real growth. We shared lunches, ideas, and plans for a future where work did not just fill pockets, but fed souls. I did not chase noise or flash, only the sense that we were building something durable, something that would outlast us by helping others, by making a real difference. I was ready to bear the load and share the weight. I gave my best effort and asked for nothing more than loyalty and honesty in return. In my life, bonds mattered more than money, and I trusted the people who stood beside me to guard those bonds as fiercely as I did. The days were not glamorous, but the rhythm felt right, like a steady drum that kept time for a ship and its crew. Then came a quiet wind that did not seem to blow hard at first, but it shifted the very air I breathed. The trust I wore like a second skin began to feel warmer when I wore it, and the warmth started to burn. Inciting incident. The betrayal came as a muted thunderclap inside a glassy room, a boardroom with a long table that reflected every nerve in my body. He, my boss, the man who had once summoned my best effort with a smile, rose with a calm that smothered the room and said the words that cut through me like cold steel. He told the truth as he saw it, but the truth was thin ice. He said I was replaceable, that the enterprise could run without me, that my time had passed, that someone younger and flashier would lead us into the next quarter. He spoke with the ease of someone who knew the right script, who had learned the art of turning loyalty into leverage. He framed a choice as necessity, and the room nodded as though listening to a plan carved from granite. My partner sat silent, eyes averted, his silence louder than any voice. My wife's eyes flickered with a fear I did not recognize. A fear that this betrayal would extend beyond a checkmark in a file, that it would fracture the life I had built at the kitchen table, where we discussed futures and birthdays and the small stubborn rituals that kept us anchored. The moment felt like a trapdoor opening under my feet, an empty promise that I would be spared only to fall into a pit of doubt. He handed me a severance letter that sounded like a kindness but tasted like ash. And I took it not because I believed his kindness, but because I needed to walk out of that room with some dignity intact. The room smelled of coffee and polished wood and fear. My heart thudded in my chest as if the walls themselves were pressing in. And I heard a whispered chorus inside me. You are not enough. You are not enough. You are not enough. I walked out with a body I barely recognized. A man suddenly smaller because he had been measured and weighed and found wanting by the one who had promised to guard him. 3. Rising action. The fall was a slow rain, and I let it soak in before I moved. I did not bolt into anger or scream into the ether. I let the sting settle into something quieter, something like iron in the gut. I watched the way the betrayal bent the world around me, the way colleagues who once trusted me started to talk in careful, practiced phrases, as if they were wearing armor around their words. I allowed myself to collapse, then rebuild in the quiet hours when the city slept and the air tasted of rain and possibility. I studied the games they played from the outside, learned the rules that rewarded bold stunts and punished caution, and I recognized the pattern the boss used to keep his throne pressed into his palm. I did not react with loudness because I knew loudness would be dismissed, but I kept a concrete plan in the back pocket of my mind. A plan that required patience, discipline, and timing. I took a lower job and let the world see me as someone who could be replaced, while I tucked away a reserve of energy and an earned respect from a few who understood the weight of quiet endurance. I began to observe the people who mattered, the ones who would listen, when I spoke not with need, but with purpose. I travelled through days with a steady breath, a fence that every setback was a test and every thigh a map. I rebuilt in small strokes. I rewired a dozen simple relationships. I regained trust by showing up early and leaving late. I offered help without expectation, and I never shortchanged the people who believed in me. I learned to read the room, to hear the unspoken, to notice the micro-emotions that betray fear or ambition, to sense the moment when a decision shifts from morale to leverage. I kept a ledger of wrongs and rights, not to exact revenge on the spot, but to recognize what could become leverage when the time was right. I found allies in the lines of code and the quiet corners of the local library, where entrepreneurs gathered, in people who had faced worth and kept their humanity intact. In this slow furnace, I melted the anger into a practical heat, enough to forge a new course, but not so bright that it blinded me. The smell of ink, the feel of a pen scratching across a fresh page, the taste of coffee turned into a ritual of chanting. And as I built, I learned to tell truth to fear, to name the fear aloud, and then place it on the shelf where it would no longer drive the wheel. 4. Climax. The moment came not in a blaze, but in a clear clinical seal of truth. And I chose a stage where the very idea of replacement would crumble under the weight of undeniable honesty. The board meeting, the investors, the cameras. The room hummed with the kind of energy that can only come from risk. I stood with the calm I had earned in the years since the firing, a voice that had learned to measure its words and press them into the moment when they would matter. I did not roar with anger, though a quiet fire burned behind my eyes. I displayed the numbers I had gathered, the emails that proved a pattern of manipulation, the timelines that showed how the plan to remove me had been crafted with a precision that smelled of arrogance. I spoke in a measured cadence about dedication, about the people who stayed late when the boss was already tired, about the lunches that fed a dream bigger than any paycheck could hold. Then I did something the room did not expect. I offered a simple exchange, not a threat, but a pledge. I would walk away if they admitted the truth, if they allowed the company to move forward with integrity, if they redistributed a portion of the value I had helped create to the people who had remained loyal. The room went still as I unveiled a quiet rebellion disguised as responsibility. I presented a plan to restore balance, to reopen doors that had closed, to fund a fund for those who had been hurt by the schemes of the few who believed they owned the room. And then I did the thing that felt almost dreamlike in its clarity. I raised a chair and announced that I no longer sought the old throne, but I would sink roots where there were none, build a place for others to succeed without stepping on them. And I would purchase the very building in which the betrayal had lived as a symbol of control. The papers trembled in the hands of the secretary. The microphone kept a patient hiss. The room drew its breath, as if at a whistle that had been waiting to blow. And when the deal closed, the office that once belonged to the boss now bore my name, not in vanity, but in proof that a man can rebuild from the ashes of a lie and plant a sturdier tree in the same soil. The moment stretched into silence, and in that quiet, I felt the weight of the truth settle like a stone in my chest, heavy, undeniable, and good. 5. Redemption arc. The victory did not erase the pain or erase the old bonds that had frayed, but it gave them a new shape, a kinder arc, a way to use what had happened to help others avoid the same fate. I did not seek revenge for its own sake. I sought justice that would prevent others from being crushed under the same boot. I started a foundation that offered mentorship, legal advice, and career coaching to people who had been victimized by corporate gangs, a place where their integrity could be valued and their hard work recognized. I wrote a book, not to take a victory lap, but to share the map I had learned. How to spot manipulation, how to survive humiliation without surrender, how to turn a betrayal into a pivot that leads you toward a stronger, more compassionate future. I built a company that did not forget those who stood beside me, a place where employees could grow into leaders without being crushed by the very system that should have protected them. I listened more than I spoke. I asked for feedback and owned my mistakes. I stayed humble enough to be taught by those around me, and bold enough to stand for what was right when it would be easier to bow to fear. The pain of that day became the fuse of a purpose wider than one ego or one office. I learned that justice is not a sudden strike, but a patient, persistent flame that lights the path for others. I'm learning that revenge, when it rose from a place of care for those who were wronged, can become influence that heals rather than destroys. My past betrayed self learned to recognize what villains wear when they think no one is watching, and my future self wore a shield forged from integrity, discipline, and the willingness to help others rise. 6. Ending. If this story moved you, like, share, and subscribe to this channel.